You cannot serve a diverse customer base whilst you yourself as an organization are not diverse.
The reason why there's different type of thinking and different type of people is to ensure that there's balance.
And I don't think we're taking the time to invest in what people are bringing in. Less than 20% of the majority of South Africans have wealth.
I mean, we've seen in some organizations we've worked in that you see maybe an area of the organization is not performing. And then when we deep dived, we saw that there was a lot of sexual harassment that was happening there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Vault, where you get to hear voices of transformation. My name is Dolly, and I am your host. Now, if you live in South Africa, you will know that inequality is not just a thing of the past, but it is a present reality for millions and millions of South Africans. In fact, it's the difference between those who've got access and those who are excluded. It is also the difference between those who've got thriving careers and those whose dreams have been deferred because of lack of access to socio-economic structures. But let's be honest, we are not immune to these kind of dynamics in South Africa. The DEI landscape across the world is shifting, interestingly enough, and with some companies making incredible strides in this work in terms of their interventions, but with some, like the United States of America, scaling back on their diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments, citing that they're ineffective, they're irrelevant, they're questioning the relevance, particularly saying that it may seem as if it's reverse racism and discrimination, and they're saying that there is DEI fatigue. But for a country like South Africa, with many people still living under systemic barriers due to our historic legacy of apartheid, does DEI or the D&I mandate that's being shifted by the West and the US in particular, is that relevant for our country, or should we be looking at our very own dynamics? To help me unpack this, I've got Sibahle Somana. I'm super excited. I really am excited to have Sibs here. I've worked with Sibs, and she's such an incredible ball of wisdom. And in fact, I love picking her brain, because she's got such incredible insight. Now, Sibs, I call her Sibs, is an employee experience consultant who's incredibly passionate about workspaces and making sure that people actually thrive in those workplaces. And then she has over a decade of experience in the human resources fraternity. Sibs, you actually have a degree in economics, right?
Yes.
You do?
I do. So I always explain to people that what I'm really passionate about is behavior.
Yeah.
So whether it is behavior with a team, behavior with the organization, behavior in an economy perspective.
Yes.
So that's why I studied economics, and then I diverged into employee experience and customer experience.
I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, I absolutely love to understand what impacts behavior, what shifts behavior. Because if you understand that, then you are able to sort of put together the right sort of ingredients to make sure that your strategy is coming into place, to make sure that you are driving the organization and the productivity in the right way, if you understand.
100%. And it brings a different lens, in the HR space in particular with organizational behavior, because you look at things broadly and not just, narrow-mindedly. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And just to continue on that, her focus is on building real connections, which I've witnessed, and helping teams work and grow and collaborate in meaningful ways. So because of the nature of her work, she has vested interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it influences organizational cultures. And that's why we have here today. So I'm excited. Welcome, Sibs.
Thanks,
Welcome. I know you and I have had many conversations just around the diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape and the shift that's happening globally, interestingly enough. And I want us to unpack that today.
I think I called you.
Yes.
Recently, when I said, Dolls,
what's happening?
What's going to happen? What's going to happen to all of the American companies in South Africa?
Yes. What does that mean for us
what
locally?
Does it mean? Because I was interested on, the impact of the shift from America to to South Africa, and I was not hearing, a particular voice.
South African voices and leaders and people of influence talking about what this actually means for us in the South African landscape. But what does it mean for us?
Look, I'm going to take what I sort of got from our conversation.
Yes.
Was that for us, it shouldn't impact us. Like, we shouldn't be looking at what is happening from America perspective and saying, okay, let's follow suit. I think there is real conversations that needs to be understood on why did we as South Africa choose to go the route of DEI? Because it is something that we saw was necessary for us. What is it that we are trying to rectify? What is it that we are trying to fix? And some of the things that maybe America is looking at is not the things that is impacting
100%.
us.
Yeah.
I think also from our perspective, what is the maturity in terms of implementing a DEI? So if we are saying, like how America is saying, that, there's no return on investment, what is the maturity? How far have we been, implementing the things, and what is it that we are seeing, and what is the value that we are seeing for organizations, for customers, and for our employees, that for us, we would make, that decision and say, oh no, we'll follow suit. So those are the things for me, just top of mind, that I think we would need to look at when we are having these conversations in organizations. What's your take?
No, 100%. I mean, I think what scares me is the fact that as much as, the West probably sets, global trends, we need to be very mindful about our own nuances locally. And to your point, why did we decide to go this journey? And I suppose the starting point is that our constitution or the foundation thereof is bedded on inclusion and creating equality. We come from an era in a history of apartheid where some people had and some people did not have. Some people started off well enough with access and some people were left behind. And so the question that continues to linger in my mind is that if we do follow suit with this, DI narrative to say stop DNI, what then happens to people that are still excluded? And those are millions and millions of South Africans we're talking about. And what also keeps me awake at night is that I don't think we fully appreciate the importance of creating unity and inclusion in our country, because we see it in your social unrest, for instance. It manifests in that way. Inequality manifests in that, where, for instance, you saw fees must fall, where students were up in arms due to lack of access in higher education. They didn't have any funding. They could not go to those schools. That's an issue of lack of access. So what do we do then? I mean, you've got only about 3.3% of female CEOs in JSE listed companies in South Africa. And the majority of South Africans, at least less than 20% of the majority of South Africans, have wealth. What do we then do? So if we follow suit and say, okay, fine, and it's good to level the playing field. We should level the playing field, actually, but it doesn't mean that we should negate creating equality or equity for every single person in this country, or at least our quest to be able to do so. I don't think that is our quest, or it should be our quest as South Africans. Our legacy is one that has affected millions and millions of South Africans. And I think that we still have a responsibility to make sure that we actually drive inclusion and not to perpetuate division. And so we can't be blinded by that. We need to be realistic. The other question I often have, Sibs, is that if we then say we're going to eradicate affirmative action measures, what do we then do? How do we replace that? What other structures do we put in place to make sure that there's equity and equality in our country? And I don't think people are thinking as far as that.
I mean, as you said it, I was like, I've never seen a discussion or a think tank that looks at that. So if we're saying, let's take this out, what is it that then we are putting in?
Yeah.
And I think for me, really what diversity, equity, and inclusion has done is it's brought a consciousness and sort of an execution plan on how to put guardrails on this.
100%.
If we don't have this, then there's nothing for us to measure. We just then talk about it. We just are like, oh, we want to change, we want to include, but there's nothing that is actually being actioned. So for me, it is, we would need to really have a conversation and say, okay, what is it that we are putting in? And I also want to say, dolls, like, it's not just we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion so far, relating just to the affirmative action.
Yes.
But there's so many
broad.
other things
It's broad.
that is included.
Absolutely.
And I think Americans only found out after the plan went through, to stop. Then they figured out, oh no, it's not.
It's
just,
actually broader than that. Yes.
It talks to many other
aspects. Yeah.
Paternity. It talks to religious stuff on making sure that everybody is included. It's not just about the woman. It's about people who are differently abled.
100%.
It's about people with neurodivergent. So how do we make sure that everybody can come to work and participate and feel like they are all in the same playing field? Or if not feel like they're in the same playing field, they feel the organization has set up structures to make 100%. Sure that everybody is participating.
100%.
And so for me, that is also quite key, is then if we scrap it, what happens to all of those other programs? And from an employee experience perspective, we underestimate how those nuances, those small things, and I'm not just talking about making sure there's pool table at the office.
Yeah.
Those nuances where you are able to go into a meeting and express yourself without feeling like you should not or you are not welcomed to makes a difference in your level of engagement in the organization. And that impacts your productivity in the organization. So if we are scrapping the DEI, organizations need to understand that ultimately you're scrapping productivity.
100%. Yeah. I love what you're saying, Sibs, because I have a feeling that D&I is misconstrued. It's misconstrued as just diverse hiring. So it's white out, black in.
And that's it.
Yeah. I think that's the notion that people have of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But that's only actually probably just the D in D&I. And then you've got equity, and then you've got inclusion in it as well. And I still think it's so critical for us to make sure that organizations, workplaces are incredibly diverse. You've got diverse perspectives. You've got diverse, thinking in the room. So you don't have homogenous views. You've got people who come in with their backgrounds, different way of seeing things. And that's quite refreshing. And that's what gets businesses to innovate. That's what gets businesses to flourish, because you've got a diverse set of thinking tanks in one room. And so I think that's why, for me, that's also quite profound. So it's not just about diverse hiring. It's critical for us to make sure that organizations are diverse, also leading to the fact that, especially organizations that serve customers, you cannot serve a diverse customer base whilst you yourself as an organization are not diverse, because then you can't solution or solve customer problems. Am I right in the thinking?
Yes. I recently saw that is not participating.
Yeah, I saw that. I loved it. Yes.
Because for them, they're very clear, even though it was the shareholders that voted.
Yes.
But they were very clear that the products that they're trying to build, they want to make sure that it is user experience can cater to a diverse customer base.
Makes sense.
And so they were like, if we can't be diverse, then how do we expect customers who buy our products to be diverse?
Yeah.
So, and I thought for me, that was such a refreshing way of thinking about this. So very much agree. You need to have an ability to think differently for your different customer bases. And if you just have, one set of thinking in the organization, then you won't be able to. I mean, we've seen cases where we've seen products that were put out.
Yep.
And then when we trace back, we see that the sign-offs was not done.
Advert, and there was also adverts.
Yes. Was it not? I think was part of it as well.
Well, one of those brands, I think. Yeah. I think it was though.
Yeah.
But in essence, you're absolutely right. And for me, it was through the entire decision-making tree. Did nobody actually pick it up? Did nobody pick that up? The fact that actually there may be a bias here, number one, and the fact that this will not necessarily land well to our customer base. And it's some of those things that we need to actually unpack and get to understand, where did that actually go wrong? Was it a mere bias, or?
For me, there's no inclusive. So there might have been, different people in the organization.
Yeah.
but there is not an inclusion of listening. So we don't listen to the different voices.
100%.
So and then that would then mean that you are having, you know, very biased decisions in the organization. And maybe you have, you know, equity. So there's women, there's different colors, but they're not being included in the decision making.
In the important conversations that need to be held and decision making. Because somebody would have said,
hey,
no.
listen. Yes.
Yeah, this is not the one.
Doesn't look right. This doesn't look right, folks. And then customers won't let you live it down.
No. Customers are vocal.
Yes, because we buy your products, and so if we can see that, look, who's not there for us in the organization, then we'll let you know.
100%.
We'll let you know.
And they want to align with the values of those organizations, actually, and they want to make sure that they align themselves with organizations that do good business.
Yes.
Responsible business.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think for me, you know, in the customer experience space over time, customers have become very conscious about, you know, social responsibility. And they are also very conscious about, you know, organizations that are authentic. So you make a promise to us,
deliver.
And then deliver. So what you're seeing in America, some of the organizations that have pulled back, there's customers who just refuse to buy there anymore. And that is the repercussion of, if you are not willing to, you know, participate and make sure that you are diverse, then we won't participate. And it's not just, you know, a set of, you know, racial class that's not buying. There's people that are just like, I feel like organizations should have a social responsibility. And if you make promises and then you don't deliver, because most of these organizations had said that we will be diverse, we'll make sure we include everybody. And now they're changing their minds. And people are like,
yeah,
I'll also change my mind with my money.
Which they have a right to, by the way.
I'll also change my mind with my money. Yeah.
And I just also think that we need to talk about the fact that some of these inclusion practices that are being implemented by organizations are not segmented to a particular race.
No.
And people don't realize that inclusion is for every single demographic, every single person, whether in society and whether in an organization. So it's not reserved for a particular race. I think the responsibility of organizations is to make sure that people thrive and they have a sense of belonging and they can resonate with the organization itself, and that they feel heard and they are seen in those organizational structures through those inclusive practices, irrespective of what I actually look like. I think there's also something to be said, Sibs, about access. That's a big thing for many South Africans. And if you look at corporate, so I call corporates the great middle between societies and government, because they've got so much influence, or at least they've got the capability to make the needed shift to creating some of these inclusive societies, because their employees are community members first before anything else. And so there's a great responsibility for corporates to actually embed some of these inclusive structures to make sure that people have a sense of belonging and they can thrive. And I want to talk about the risks of not, you know, creating those inclusive practices or structures in an organization. What does that do to employee experience? I come in and I feel like I don't belong in this organization. I'm not catered for. I'm not seen. And my unique needs are not met. Let me give you an example. I come into this organization and I only have a matric and I have a low-level job. I have aspirations to grow into senior levels of this organization, but there are no structures that have been put in place to make sure that I grow. Let's say, for instance, bursaries or other educational platforms for me to be able to progress. And for me, that's access. That's recognizing that some people in your organization started off well, while some did not. And what do we do to bridge that gap to make sure every single person is on the same level or playing field? And I think that's a huge opportunity for corporate in terms of driving employee experience.
So I would even use the word that it's really, if you pay attention to that, you actually unlock value with your human capital.
Yes.
If you really pay attention to who is in the organization and what it is that, you know, they want, and what it is that you are trying to build in terms of the strategy of the organization.
Yeah.
So if you say, as a business, we want to move towards this direction, and then you need to understand what is the human capital that
100%.
we have, and then how do we unlock the value. More often than not, and I like the word you use, is that it's not that people are unwilling, but there's no doors or windows or gates for them to actually access it. And as an organization, there is a responsibility from the human resource side, which I call the value side of human
100%.
resource,
Yeah.
on understanding talent, on understanding access, from performance management, from remuneration, right? Because that's also access.
Absolutely.
And really unpacking what is stopping, or what is it that is getting in the way for people? What is it that is getting in the way for people to feel like they don't belong?
Yeah.
Because the other thing is, if you don't have inclusion, you won't even hear the people saying to you, look, we could do better if you just gave us this. People will just, we've seen it in surveys where people just are not coming with honest answers on how they feel, because maybe they feel the environment is threatening, or if they raise their voices, then, down the line, it will come back to bite them. That in itself is a sign that it's not being inclusive. It's not open for discussion in the organization. And I think what I always found, quite interesting with the work that we did in organizations is that you couldn't really put a label when something was happening and be like, that's inclusion.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
belonging.
Yes.
So people don't actually know when it's happening.
Yes.
Because you can't label it.
Correct.
Yeah, you can't be like, the reason why you are able to do
is
that
because there's inclusion.
There's inclusion.
They should experience it. They should feel it on a day-to-day basis, even though they shouldn't be able to label it. You're right, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's happening,
yes,
right?
Yes.
But let me tell you, the moment those structures are not in place, people will be able to see that, something is missing.
100%.
So when things are running smoothly, when there is inclusion, when there is belonging, you can't pinpoint it. But the moment it's not there, you can feel that something is missing here. You might not be able to know what it is. And who wants to go to work where you can't express yourself? Then why are you there?
Yeah.
Why are you there? If you coming in with, and we said, look, we feel like your expertise and your experience will really make sense for us to drive this organization, but please keep quiet.
Yeah.
Why am I here?
Yeah, I know.
Why am I here? So I don't know if that answers your question.
No.
And
It absolutely
you can also
does.
unpack from your side.
It absolutely does, but it also leads me to this question, maybe Sibs, but do you think that we're able to articulate diversity, equity, and inclusion in the business case thereof? Do you think we're able to land that? Because you make such an important point around leveraging human capital to deliver on the business strategy, because there's no other way you can do it, actually. So you can have business strategy on paper, but you still need human capital to deliver on that business strategy. For me, it's almost common sense, but it's not everybody that thinks that way, right? So how do we then leverage on that? And I don't think that we are able to articulate this D&I business case. If you think of hypothetically organizations that want to drive business strategy, let's say customers are one of their focus or strategic priorities, customer experience. For me, it's a no-brainer that immediately when you talk about leveraging on customers to deliver performance, your customers are going to be diverse, your customer needs are going to be diverse, and you need to meet your customers where they are and understand what their needs are. In my mind, you need to have people inside the organization who are diverse enough to be able to solution and understand, to our earlier point. And sometimes I don't know if we, from a human capital point of view, or even leadership actually, are able to articulate the DEI business case and why it's crucial to deliver on business strategy. That's the one part. But secondary to that is there's a moral responsibility for organizations to create inclusive environments. There is a moral and ethical responsibility. It's good business. It shouldn't be an afterthought. In fact, when you're discussing business strategy, you should be thinking diversity, equity, and inclusion. The people that are going to lead this business, are they diverse enough to understand the business itself and our customer needs? And secondly, when we talk about equity, does every single person that works in this organization have everything that they need to be able to flourish within this organization? Then inclusion. Do we have structures in place to make sure every single person feels like they are heard, they can express themselves, that this space is psychologically safe for people to be able to say, we don't believe in this vision, perhaps do A, B, C, and D. And I don't think that we are able to articulate that business case enough, or maybe we just don't have a seat at the table to be able to discuss these things. But I just also see it as a moral imperative and as just good business when a SIBS, because D&I does not, just camp in organizations. It infiltrates societies, it infiltrates communities. And I say this all the time. Some of the social ills that employees go through, they don't go into the workplace and then sign out and say, okay, fine, I've just been domestically abused and therefore I'm coming into a workplace, I'm leaving that behind me. They carry all of those social ills with them to an organization. Do you understand what I'm saying? Organizations have a responsibility of understanding what these nuances and these dynamics are and try and see how they can solution for them, because if they don't, I'm not going to give you 100%. I'm going to give you 50%.
I like how you keep saying that organizations have the responsibilities. I think more than anything, it's not all organized. I think it's organizations that really want to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can choose not to participate in this. And then you're just like, no, that's not what we're about.
Wow.
But will you survive as a business?
Wow.
Because humans are changing. Humans are expecting, what humans want to participate in is not what was happening in 1945.
100%, Sibs. Yeah. Human centricity
has changed. And you can ask yourself, why has it changed? Social media has changed. Access to this amount of information at real time has changed what we expect from organizations. So when we come in organizations, we want to be treated the same way that we are treated when we go into an Apple shop. Right? And so if there is diversity in Apple, we then expect that there's diversity in our organizations. And you can sit and say, that's, you just come to work, but that's not how humans are.
No.
And as leaders, you need to really understand that. I think the other thing that I want to touch on is when you reference the part that, what do we have an extensive understanding in terms of what is it that we're looking in Indiana? I think what has been comfortable in organizations for a very long time, and I'm going to speak about South African organizations, is just measuring
employment equity.
Yes. I know. And we're not doing any measures to say, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion impact innovation, right? How does, what I mean? How does it impact, the level of critical thinking in the organization? And so when you are looking at your strategy and you're saying, this is what I want to achieve. So if you are doing a turnaround, if you're doing a growth strategy, you must then look at the metrics that you are measuring there.
Yes.
And saying, okay, for us to be able to deliver this, we need leaders to think differently.
Yes.
So if we need leaders to think differently, maybe we need different leaders.
Yes.
We can't have the same mindset.
Yes.
And what then pushes this, say, different mindset are the things that come through via diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for me, I think that there has been a lag in terms of saying, how do we unpack that spreadsheet that we measure and say, what are the other metrics that are coming in here? And because those are not necessarily overt, but there's an impact if we're having, a same type of thinking. I also want to make an example that always I have when I look at diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
When we look at how the world functions and not the human, but the animals, the plants, if you ever have the mistake of just having one type of plant, it overtakes all the other plants.
Yes.
And it actually destroys the environment. If you put rabbits in a desert alone, you're going to have a disaster there. There's going to be an ecological disaster there.
Yes.
So what makes us think that, we shouldn't be thinking in those same lines as human beings? The reason why there's different type of thinking and different type of people is to ensure that there's balance.
100, yeah.
Is to ensure that there is sustainability. It is to ensure that there is, long-term thinking within. So for me, that's another way that I look at, diversity, equity, and inclusion is to say, if you are sitting in a room and there's just one type of person, it's entirely skewed. and there's probably a bit of destruction that's going to happen here.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I've...
No, I love it. I'm loving this conversation because I'm also just thinking, I'm going to get back to metrics right now because I think that's a fundamental point that you made. But I'm just thinking, Sibs, there's a lot of empowerment that needs to be done to support leaders in the space as well, because as we all know, I mean, leaders are too preoccupied with delivering results. And there's nothing wrong with that, but not to a point of, you have to be able to slow down, take a step back and understand the people that you're using to deliver those results, where are they and where do they come from, right? And I'm saying this because there's an organization I once worked for, and we did a survey and we got to find out that some of the employees were only having one meal per day. So they would go to work with one meal a day. They didn't have direct access to water. So they literally had to go out to go and get water. So some of those fundamental basics.
And those are customer-facing employees.
Employees. So I get to work with only having had one meal. I don't have access to water, maybe don't even have transport money that's going to last me the whole month. And I have to go and stand in front of customers and service customers. And I often think about some of those well-being issues. Do we really, keep them in mind? And if I'm a leader, do I know what's going on with my team, or do I treat everybody the same in that team? Do I know where Dolly comes from? Do I know the struggles that Dolly's going through? And I think the responsibility of leaders is to understand the diversity that exists within their teams beyond race. And because there are dimensions to diversity. And so it's so critical that if you want to optimize the performance of your teams, is that you understand who your team members are, their differences, the baggages that they come with and they carry, in order for you to be able to support them and cultivate them to be able to perform to what you're looking for. But I don't think many leaders think that way.
So I think and I think it speaks to then and me understanding when you're saying, organizations need to, have a responsibility.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you, because sometimes organizations will have, the right store at the right location. They have, the right products. The workflow is working, but somehow there's no money coming in, and it's, they'll think, maybe we need to upskill them and, product knowledge, and that doesn't work.
And it's always that, by the way.
Why do you
Customer service training, product knowledge. It is always that.
But, maybe, perhaps the issue is well-being.
Most of the time. Yeah. I'd want to argue most of the time.
I always say is human beings always, if you can figure out the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
You need to understand, is the basic bottom line of the pyramid of survival taken care of?
Yeah.
If that's not taken care of, then
forget about everything else.
It's difficult to smile when you're hungry. So, so I agree with you. I agree that sometimes, leaders are not paying attention, and it's not that you can't have structures in place and that don't, overtake your cost. Because then you would need to understand what is the cost of looking after that.
Sure.
Which is, I think, why some organizations don't pay attention to it, because they're like, that's not my problem.
And for some, it's a non-negotiable. They will invest in it because they want to create the right associate or employee experiences.
Yes. So for me, it's, you need to go there as an organization, and not just at frontline. So maybe at frontline, there's in the context of South Africa, it could be that it's a bread and butter thing. But when you move up the ranks with people who are driving extremely expensive cars, you feel there's mental well-being from exhaustion and burnout. So you need to understand those family dynamics that people are having, the stress levels, the economy. What is it that as an organization, are we putting in place to make sure that we are hearing those voices? and making sure that people are able to still stay engaged, understanding them. And I think that's where well-being would play a role
would come in as well.
In diversity, equity, and inclusion.
But you know what I also love, Sibs, that's coming through as well very strongly is that I just think that employees are becoming radically vocal, to be honest, now outside of your normal structures now, your employee surveys and stuff like that. They are looking for leaders that see them, leaders that know them. They're looking for leaders that lead with human centricity. And they are being absolutely vocal. And I don't think organizations are ready for that.
Yes.
I don't think they are.
I think that's why I reference to humans have changed in a sense that perhaps 30 years ago, there was a clean-cut line between, this is work, that's home. Don't bring home to work and don't take work to home.
Yeah.
But that's when we were able to, come in and computers were at the office. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Now we take laptops home, so which means work is going
there's a blur.
home.
Yeah, like there's a complete blur now. We don't know what's what. Yeah.
Yes, and just the level of expectations on transparency and being authentic, because we've also seen the lack of that and what destruction it does to humans and to society at large, and even to the planet itself. That when organizations are not telling the truth, when they are not, in fact, the word that I like to use is, if there's no trust, me and trust, like if there's no trust within the organization and that is falling apart, humans are able to pick it up. And if we don't trust you, then we struggle to work for you. And if you are not willing to have that conversation with us, then you'll have things like quiet quitting happening in the organization.
Artificial harmony.
Yeah, where people are just coffee badgering, coming in and going. So you need to, as organizations, for me, yes, humans have changed, definitely. They're no longer willing to put up with it.
No, they're not. Or the other end of the spectrum, Sibs, is that there is that artificial harmony. And sometimes people confuse artificial harmony to be psychological safety.
Yes.
But there are two different things where you've got psychological safety and you can hear people talking, they're vocal, they can express themselves. They feel like, you know what, I'm not going to be punished for speaking up here. So I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn in this kind of environment. But artificial harmony is me keeping quiet and pretending like everything is okay, which is what is predominantly happening in organizations. And then we sit back and we say, but nobody's complaining, nobody's saying anything. So it means everything is fine.
But how do you know everything is not fine? Is because there's lack of productivity.
100%. And the business is most likely not going to perform.
Yeah.
That's
it.
The
business is not performing.
It's not going to perform.
And you are saying to yourself, what is it? Do we need to do more marketing? No, people are not there.
They're not, and also, Sibs, I feel like when people speak or given the opportunity to speak, they do speak. I mean, if you look at all of these surveys that we're running, and I do want to say, I want to say this. If organizations are not intentional about hearing people, they must stop doing these surveys. Stop with the lip service. Stop wasting people's time. Stop with the surveys. If you're not intentional about taking that data and doing something meaningful with it, just leave it alone. Like it's honestly, I think that's the most dignified thing organizations can do. Just leave it alone. And I getting into matrix now, because I think that's critical. We've seen that there's a very strong correlation between some of the soft metrics like your inclusion, safety, belonging, and the like with performance. 9 times out of 10, if the company or the business indexes in terms of performance, operational efficiencies are down, these ones are down.
Yes.
Why are we missing that link?
100%. I think it's because there is anxiety, on what is it that we actually do. Also, I think businesses underestimate the amount of work that is required, just as much as there's a lot of investment and time and work and discussions that is needed on the business metrics to make sure that you can see it. There's also a lot of time and investment and work that is needed on what we would call, I don't like to call them soft, I call them the quiet matrix.
Yes.
Because they're not loud,
yes,
but they have a strong
impact
on the
delivery
organization.
performance. Yeah,
Yes, on the organization.
absolutely.
I want to speak about something that's a bit sensitive, but I think I have a sense of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen in some organizations we've worked in that you see maybe an area of the organization is not performing. And then when we deep dived, we saw that there was a lot of sexual harassment that was happening there.
Yes.
And for me, it's when we're talking about DEI, there's that as well.
Oh, Sibs.
There's bullying, there's harassment,
discrimination.
there's discrimination. And
there's still racism.
If you're
Sibs.
coming into the office with that level of tension, you will not be able to move those business metrics. You will not. If you feel threatened,
you're simply not going to perform. You're not going to give your best.
What's your take on that?
No, I totally agree with you. And I think it's those important elements that we often miss, that in order for people to be present in an environment, we need to meet them where they are and we need to understand what they're coming in with. And I don't think we're taking the time to invest in what people are bringing in. We act as if these things are superficial. They don't matter, to your point. They don't belong in the office doors, but they actually have a significant impact on delivery. And I think that I would actually argue, Sibs, to be honest with you, that when organizations put together business strategy, whatever, to your point, turnaround, growth strategy, whatever it is that the organization is focusing on, in tandem with that, have got to be those quiet metrics that you're talking about. These two can never happen in isolation. And I think we need to think about these things differently, because I sometimes feel, yes, some organizations will say business strategy, they'll put all the other functions, and then they'll say people.
And that is what it's all lumped there.
Yeah. And it's people, but people is like an afterthought.
Double click, what's people?
Yeah, double click, what's people in there, right? And most likely it's going to be talent, because organizations want to be able to preserve talent and keep talent that is going to foster. But what does it take to keep that talent is what we need to be zooming in. It's not just about the technical acumen people have. What does it take to keep people motivated? That talent that you're talking about, what does it take to make sure that their well-being is intact and that they're in the right environment to be able to deliver? So it's not just about succession planning. It's not just about bringing in the best. It's not just about the right development programs. It is about the employee experience. And part of that and the subset of that is this diversity, equity, and inclusion that we are talking about. And how do we leverage that to make sure that we create unique experiences for people to be able to stay in this organization and deliver to their full capacity? I don't think we're zooming into that.
No, and how you see it, or how we've seen it, is the first thing, is if you are focusing on something, then you actually invest and you put resources. I mean, budget towards it.
You do. You do.
You put budget towards it.
Sorry to cut you off. Have you ever seen, like, even in discussions around budgets for that fiscal year?
Why do you think I'm saying this?
When they want to cut budgets, where do they start? People. Training. People. When they want to cut budgets, it's always, and that for me is a problem. It's a significant problem, Sibs, because the human capital should be a key driver of the organization. In fact, it can't be an afterthought.
No.
It should be at the forefront of those discussions.
Again, for me, if you're a leader and if you were to assess your organization currently as a body of work, right? What is the health of it? Because it is difficult for you to say to yourself, in the next 12 months, we want to achieve A, B, and C, and D, and move towards this direction, but the body is sick.
Sure.
And the body has been sick for the past 8 years. The toes are not moving. The hands are a bit shaky. And you are saying to yourself, we must run towards this goal. No. What's going on with the health of the organization? And for me, DEI is part of the metric that assesses the health of the body.
Oh man, I couldn't have said that better. You need to say that louder. You have to say that louder. Since I totally agree, man. I just think, again, I'll always say that organizations do have a responsibility, I suppose, much like societies and government structures as well. I do think that if we eradicate any D&I intervention in South Africa, we'll be in a crisis. In fact, it'll perpetuate the inequality, like I mentioned, that exists. Where there's inequality, you must know for sure, the crime rates are going to escalate.
We'll go backwards.
And also, Sebs,
We'll go
I have
backwards.
so much to say.
I mean, you can see it even now with this glitch that's happening in the country.
Yeah.
You can see, but this thing is going to take us back.
It is going to take us back.
And we saying, we should have been okay now. It's 30 years down the line. We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. And also, we're not intentional enough about creating access for everybody, to be honest. I don't think we are intentional.
We're not intentional, I think we have an aspiration, but we are not executing. Yeah. We have an aspiration. And I think everybody wants to make sure that everybody is there, but execution is a reality that I think we're struggling with.
No, but that's so true. And that's why many of these D&I interventions, not just in South Africa, I think globally, in countries where it's not working, it's essentially that. It's really in the implementation.
Yeah.
It's in the implementation. And
I think for me, one of the reasons why implementation sometimes will lag is because we can't call a thing a thing. You know me. We can't sit and just be adults and say, okay.
No, we can't. We're
let's call a thing
around. Yeah, we are.
Let's call it.
And these conversations are so necessary, Sibs. It's so important for us to be able to sit and have conversations that will make sure that we break down these levels of division that still permeate, through workplaces, through societies, because they are still there. And it's sad.
My curiosity is, because, the question I might even have for your thoughts on, I find that some leaders don't see the value of this, like at a personal level. So even though they're in the organization and they have to smile and wave and nod to it, but at a personal level, they're like, neither here or there.
Yeah.
What is your take on that and its influence on the execution?
Yeah, so Sibs, I think it's a very sad reality. But I also want to challenge leaders who are listening to this to say, I don't think there's a single leader that has not been in a situation where they have not experienced exclusion in whatever form. Do you understand what I'm saying? There are leaders out there who have been marginalized, who have experienced exclusion, who have experienced spaces where they could not express themselves, who have been shunned down, irrespective of race. There are leaders who have struggled with inclusion. And also the challenge then that I have is that if you as a leader have experienced that, would you not want to change the narrative for the people that you're leading? Why would you want to lead people in exactly the same way that you don't want to be led and that you've been led? And that's always the thing. Like, you learn from the kind of leadership that you don't want, and you go and do something different when you're leading teams. Because D&I is not for HR. It's a lived reality. It's a lived experience for each and every individual. So if I know that I went through or I was exposed to certain barriers and I was not in the best workplace environment that I wanted, would I not want to create the best for my team? Would I not want that? So it's really taking these things from the head, when Sibs, and getting them here into the heart, and really being empathetic, towards the people that you're leading and understanding them in the different variations that they come with, because people come with a lot of pain points in this environment and they're looking for workplaces that will heal them. But sometimes, instead of healing people as leaders, not only leaders, but instead of healing people in those environments, we add on to their wounds and their scars. We add on to their wounds and their scars. People are looking for healing. They spend the majority of their time in those workplaces. And they want, or at least they want, an illusion of it being a hospital where they're going to get help and where they're going to get healed. And we don't do that. And for me, and that's what I'm saying to you, this is not just about corporate. It's a dignity, issue. It's a respect issue. And when we talk about our constitution as South Africans, it's really about respect, dignity, Sibs. It's about human beings. It really is just about human beings. It's about ubuntu. That is the spirit of our country as South Africans. And we need to carry that spirit everywhere and not just keep it, it's not a workplace thing. Yes, like I did say, I think workplaces have responsibility and they're instrumental in terms of influence, but it should be a day-to-day thing. In fact, it should be part of organizational values everywhere, everywhere.
What I want to add towards the leadership part of it, I think leaders need to understand that when you come in, there is you as an individual, and then there's the role that you are playing as a leader.
Yeah.
Right? You say, I sign up to play a role in this leadership, space. And in there, what is always required out of leaders is decision making.
Yeah.
And it is courage. Right. And that decision making, because what I found is that there was a lot of decisions that are not made because people don't have courage of going against, the status quo.
Yeah.
And because nobody's saying, hang on, we're here in this room as leaders, and I'm not just talking, HR, I'm talking leaders in the organization.
Yeah.
Where you are having systemic things continue in the organization that affect, diversity and equity and inclusion. And no leader has the courage to say, I think we need to make a decision around this.
I mean, you talk about sexual harassment.
We need to make decisions.
That is scary. Like to think that as organizations, we're counting the number of cases of people that are being sexually harassed.
And we've
violated.
We've read some of those.
We've read some of those. People that are being sexually violated in a workplace, and we treat them as numbers. We treat those cases as numbers. It's scary, Sibs. Sexual violation in a workplace that can be contained, that's got guardrails, by the way, and we treat them as numbers. Like we need to do better. We absolutely have got to do better. And then, so as we end off, I just want us to unpack quickly just the value of metrics when I think that's critical. And the fact that it's not just about putting these D&I interventions. And by the way, D&I interventions are not a blanket approach. Understand where your organization is and the dynamics and the nuances that your organization is facing, and then tailor initiatives to that. So don't see other organizations focusing on gender equity. Okay, fine, wrong example, because that's rampant everywhere, I suppose, prevalent everywhere, gender inequality. But I'm just saying, like, the initiatives have got to be aligned to the pain points of the organization.
What I want to add to that is, the reason why people also give up on DEI and say, it has no value.
It's ineffective, yeah.
Look, you're changing how people think.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is some things that you can hammer in for 3 months, and that's a short-term measure. But most of the time, if you are shifting culture, if you are shifting
personal
thinking,
mastery,
yes,
yeah,
that is a lagged effect.
100%. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey, and you just need to keep at it. I think for me, one of the things that I know that in an organization that leaders don't sometimes grasp, because again, it's quiet metrics, is not understanding that this is a long-term game.
Yes.
It's a long-term game.
Yes.
And once you stick with it and stay,
yes,
the benefit when you get there,
yeah,
if you can build an organization where people have psychological safety, once you get there, the returns are
they're just phenomenal.
For years.
They're phenomenal, Sibs.
For years.
Yeah. But even with the incremental changes, like let's say, for instance, we spoke about the different metrics, for instance, like your engagement, your belonging, your turnover rates, retention, all of that stuff. We spoke about those. I mean, once you start seeing a shift, even if it's a small shift towards the positive, right? You do often see an effect, a positive effect on business performance. We've seen this because we've measured those metrics in tandem with your customer ENPS. And you'll see that when your customers are satisfied, it's because these guys, the employees are actually satisfied and they're thriving and they're in the right environment. And therefore they're able to service your customers, right? And your customers are happy. And what happens? Your customers come back. And then you make money, revenue, performance, operational efficiencies, and all of that stuff. And so I think it's critical that we don't just implement initiatives, but we tie them to tangible metrics that we can actually measure to say, are these shifting the dial, the initiatives that we're implementing in terms of, what we're looking for in terms of business performance? And I think sometimes that's where the disconnect is. It's like the sexy stuff. It's the nice stuff. We do the flirty stuff, but we don't actually measure the impact of that. And I think I need to call that out as well, to say that we should not forget about the numbers and how they affect the bottom line as well.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And being clear on, like you're saying, being clear on what's driving the business and then focusing on that and really sponsoring it. Because I just want to say, for the teams that are pushing culture, DEI,
listen, man,
having to get the organization to listen and pay attention, sometimes, that takes work.
It takes a lot of work, and we need to appreciate the lead, because there are leaders that get it right. So we have worked with leaders that are phenomenal,
yes,
where this is a no-brainer for them,
yes,
where they know
yes,
that in order for my business to perform, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And they've been so refreshing. And it's so refreshing working with those leaders, because they just get it. That actually, I need to take care of the human capital, because the human capital takes care of the rest. It takes care of everything else. And it's just so phenomenal. It's been so phenomenal.
It's a pleasure to work with those.
It's a pleasure to work with those leaders that actually get it, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So, I love this conversation. Circling back as we're part of this conversation, Sibs, with the global trends that are happening in the shift in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, we've spoken about why it's important to preserve the inclusion and equality in our country for individuals, for the millions and millions of South Africans that are still left behind today, the millions and millions of South Africans that are still unemployed because they don't have access, millions and millions of South Africans that still don't have food on their table because of access. They can't get into universities because of access. They can't get jobs because of access. Myriad of other things that involve access. It is so critical that we emphasize that inclusion is critical to creating the equality that we're looking for in this country. And we need to endorse more conversations around this in order for our country, our organizations, to be able to transform to where we need them to be. So irrespective of the global trends, that are led by or fueled by the West and the US in particular, that is not our story as South Africans. No. That is not our story as South Africans. We come from a legacy of division, heavy division, that still permeates till today. Apartheid is not just a thing of the past, but there are systemic ramifications that we still need to contend with as a country. So we have no business flirting with the idea of eradicating diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thoughts?
Yes, I agree with you. Look, if we build organizations and environments where people are facilitated and told, this is how we work here, and you have those conversations on how do we play nice with each other, then you will have productivity in the organization. And if, unfortunately, and we don't, we all are adults, but because we're human beings, right? Because for me, I think it's not just, with racism, just human beings, just coming into the organization and saying, how do we play nice so that we can achieve the goals? If we don't have those guardrails, your business will be in trouble.
It will be in trouble, Sibs. And also for me, again, going back to the Ubuntu element, I think it's so crucial that people take a step back. I think my call out is that people take a step back and understand other people's lived realities. I think sometimes we have blinders and we tend to look at things from our own lenses, and we live every single day through what we believe is the right thing. But how about we take a step back and understand other people's lived realities, their backgrounds, and where they come from? And maybe then, if we do that, we will appreciate how we approach people and what people are going through. I think the world could be a better place if we actually did that.
I agree with you.
Parting shots?
I think I want to reiterate the fact that, this is everybody's responsibility in the organization. It doesn't sit with the DEI function. It doesn't sit with HR. It sits with everybody because everybody needs to participate. I think it's something in the long term that is still very much required. That is still very much required. And the organization needs to focus on it. I think it is imperative for your employees and your customers. So that is what I would say. I think I was supposed to look there. That's what I would say.
That's amazing, Sibs. Oh, it's been so amazing having you here. I loved every bit of this conversation, and really thank you for the work that you're doing and the impact that you're making in your own space just to drive inclusive spaces, and really just guiding in terms of what it takes to create the right environment, not only for our customers, but for employees as well at large. And your passion for people, your passion for creating environments where people can actually thrive and to be left in a better space than where organizations actually found them. So thank you just for your expertise and your craft and respecting your craft in this place and just being a fantastic voice of transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, Sibahle Somana. I love Sibs. I feel like she's such a firebrand, and she's so wise. Thank you so much for joining us on the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Vault. I incredibly enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you did as much as we did as well. So keep replaying this and share the word, share the love, and tell everybody that inclusion matters. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.